Jon Hall is a policy specialist for the United Nations Development Programme. He spoke about well-being, wildlife and tourism in the face of COVID-19 at the Happiness Roundtable 2020.
There's a certain sort of Gaia-like planet bites back scenario around COVID-19, and it's surely not a coincidence that pangolins, who are the poster child of species being trafficked, have been implicated in the origins of the virus. So I think, it's fertile ground to really do something positive to come out of this, as really refreshing to hear that Congress here in the US is so open. Around the world, people, including within the UN, everyone's sort of claiming this crisis, this shock will be a step change to the way we deal with travel, with globalization, with inequality. I mean, you can insert any topic here that you care about. I'm less convinced, I have to say, because looking back, our species has a habit of forgetting very, very quickly. But I am more optimistic about wildlife conservation because this one was predicted. Experts have talked about this for years. They knew where it was going to start. Of course, no one listened properly. But all we know is there is another one around the corner, unless we start getting much more serious about the wildlife trade, about land clearing. And what this one, perhaps more than the other pandemics, things like SARS, is this one has been so expensive and has been truly global in its reach of both the disease and the fallout. So I think nearly the whole world for once is on the same page. How does happiness fit into this? Well, first of all, one of the great powers of looking at happiness as a measure of progress at any level is it's this unifying concept that can bring everything together. So at the moment, nearly every government, not least in the US, there is this debate about the balance of how do we reopen the economy and stop the spread of the disease? There are economic impacts with one course, there are health impacts on the other, and how do we get the balance right? And this is impossible to reconcile using any sort of metrics based around the economy or health, but you could use a measure of well-being to look at the impacts on that to take a decision. There are health impacts, there are economic impacts, they both flow into well-being. And maybe that should be steering decision-making. At another level, and perhaps moving slightly away from happiness, a little bit of work I've been thinking about for the next Human Development Report looks at Indigenous communities around the world and their relationship with nature and with wildlife. Sometimes I think it's been over-romanticized. There are many examples throughout history of Indigenous peoples pushing species to extinction and doing significant damage to environments when they first arrive to ecosystems, but at a local level, and it pales in significance to what's happening now in the Anthropocene. But there is a lot I think we can learn from the Indigenous, particularly around their use of norms and the way in which they have effectively policed their environments through taboos. You can't hunt in certain places, certain tribes can't eat certain meats. And that's been extremely effective in protecting their livelihoods and their ecosystems. And I think there are things we can learn about how we can deal with things like climate change and conservation at a global level through just changing people's attitudes. This isn't political, it's about sort of really getting people to think in a different way. And right at the local level, talking about ecotourism, strikes me that ecotourism is one form of tourism that can open up before many of the others. And obviously here in the US, national parks have opened or are opening long before museums and art galleries and theme parks and all the other things. So ecotourism is inherently safer. Nature is good for happiness. I think the last World Happiness Report had a small section on this showing bird watching made people happy. I would think mammal watching does. There's no higher form of eudaimonic flow than looking for and watching an animal in the wild, in my experience. Everything else just melts away. I know two psychiatrists in Switzerland who are both keen wildlife watchers and are thinking of starting trips specifically for people with depression as a way to treat that. So there's all sorts of interesting things around happiness and on wildlife, and also around happiness and just general care for the environment. And I'll finish with a short anecdote I heard at a conference we ran a couple of weeks ago with a colleague in Australia saying that he's seen a small study done around Canberra of wine growers, looking at those who use sustainable organic practices and those who don't. What was interesting was two things. First of all, there is a general perception, I think, that, okay, organic practices may be better for the environment, but you're probably not going to get as much wine. And the study showed that it it was just as effective, if not more effective, as a farming practice to grow the grapes. But also, and even more interesting, was the farmers using the organic practices were significantly happier than those not. So there's something in that, I think, that we were worthy of further thought. But there's something there around our general stewardship for the environment and how it can let us feel like we're better human beings and happier as a result. So thank you. That's my vision.